everybody, and welcome to Command Point. It is the first day of Kill Team, and on these 12 days leading up to Christmas, we are going to be talking about a different faction in each episode, interviewing a player that has done very well with that faction, somebody that is perhaps an expert. And today we are starting with none other than the Orc Kommandos, and I'm joined by Emmanuel from Strategic Advantage. Emmanuel, how's it going?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Shane?
I'm doing very well. I'm feeling festive. I'm ready to talk about Kommandos and talk about a whole bunch of factions. But today is just Kommandos. So you've played them quite a bit. You're quite the fan.
a bit obsessed. I have two commando kill teams.
Yeah.
So I like them so much, I built them twice.
And then you have other teams that are not Kommandos, but they're orcs. But they're not orcs.
Yes.
They're not originally orcs. You've made them orcs.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. I'm staring down right at my Pathfinder leader, who I actually cannibalized my first ever grot that I painted as a grot leader for Kill Team 2018. I turned him into the Pathfinder
Wow.
leader. I'm looking at him right now.
Wonderful.
Urzog Squigbita lives on.
Very good. So let's get right into this. So let's say
hmm
for somebody that is interested in Kill Team, they're kind of looking at the factions, but they don't know which one they want, but they maybe are narrowing down on Kommandos. How would you describe that play style that Kommandos have?
So they're a mid-range team, meaning that they're not a horde, they're not elite, but they dip their toes into a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm.
And what's neat about that is that you can flex their play style depending on where you would have an advantage. Where would it be more beneficial to be leaning on the elite side where it's more about hitting hard and surviving stuff? Or do you want them to lean a little bit more on the overwhelming side, like you use your activations to your advantage?
Yeah.
They have a healthy mix of melee, really good shooting, surprisingly.
Yeah.
Orcs are not characteristically known for shooting well, but these ones, they can pack a punch from range. And just some of the best ploys in the game. So they got a really good toolkit, but they're not one of these overly complex teams either, because some of these toolkit teams can just get way into 4D, 5D chess and to
Mm-hmm.
try to figure out how to effectively pilot them. But commandos are deceivingly simple. Like,
Okay.
oh, is that the right way to say it? They're a lot more simple to execute while still having a deep toolkit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess with
hmm
that in mind, what about that play style specifically caught your eye? Like what about the way that they play is exciting for you as a Commandos player?
Well, full disclosure, when the edition dropped, I built my whole team before I even saw the rules, when all we had was those little thumbnail images.
Yeah.
So I was destined to force myself to like this team, but it worked out that they perfectly mesh with my play style. I like a mixed threat team. I like having good melee options as well as good shooting options, which is why I loved mixing Flash Gits into my Boys and Knobs team
Yeah.
for last edition.
Good old
I
days.
liked having the good old days. Oh, I miss Flash Gits. But I digress. So that really appeals to me. That they're a threat no matter what. They could be a threat no matter what end of the board is more important to you to be a threat from. And in addition to that, they have some great ploys that help turn the tide of certain key situations. Just a Scratch, which is one of their tactical ploys, is easily one of the best tactical ploys in the game. You get to ignore the damage of a hit.
Yeah.
So it can turn the tide of a melee back and forth. And it can also ensure that you're surviving where you need to from a range shot, for example. In addition to that, they have the ability to stay concealed, which lets you use terrain very effectively to march your way up the board or to bounce in and out of terrain with shots and stuff like that. It's a lot of their playstyle just really meshes with using the terrain, using the core rules, but also maintaining a mixed threat, and that's really where my playstyle excels. So it was destined to work out,
Very
even though I
nice.
was probably going to force it to work out no matter what.
So I guess earlier you kind of said that they were a little bit of a simple team to approach in terms of like the early like complexity maybe. So would you say
hmm
they have a lower learning curve? They're kind of easier to pick up. Like for you, how many games did it take until it started to like really click what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot, and it's a little hard to answer because I was also learning Kill Team 2021
That's true.
as I was learning this team because I picked them up right at the drop of the edition. But if I can kind of separate what I was learning about the game versus the team, I would say maybe about 5 to 10 games to really iron out and get this team on lock. Um, the the thing about the team is their specialists are very straightforward, but what you start to unlock with more and more games is the hidden strength in those specialists. The
Hmm.
comms boy gives someone an APL by using an APL. So he just donates his APL to another model. That's very simple, very easy to understand. You're not reading 18 different clauses to try and figure out how his special ability goes off. As like a direct contrast to that, you have the bird from Corsairs, right? Where you have to read a half legal document just to know what your modifier is to see if the
Yeah.
bird ability goes off. So a direct contrast there. It's very simple to see how they work and know how to play him on the board, like know how the rule is executed. But then the more time you get with the team, the more you start to realize it's like, oh, that extra APL. It's really neat if I put him on this guy, or I can do
Hmm.
something really interesting and catch my opponent off guard if I put him on this guy. Like one of my favorite tricks is putting that extra APL on my slasher boy. Being able to throw a silent knife, then charge, then fight is something that a lot of people wouldn't be prepared for, and they're doing that melee math, not really worried about that charge until you take off 4 to 6 wounds off of them, or 4 to 5 wounds, depending on how lucky you are with those
Yeah.
knife rolls. And then all of a sudden, that melee math is completely out the window, and you have a tremendous advantage. So that's what I mean about the learning curve being a little bit on the lower side. You can effectively play this team and get to a moderate degree of competency fairly quickly. And it's a good team to learn the game with as well because they don't break many of the rules at all.
Yeah.
So you're not going to have to relearn the core rules of this game. Like if you picked up Void Dancers, for example, you're going to miss out on a lot of the core rules to the game, and you're going to be caught off guard if you try and play a new team. You're going to have to relearn some stuff. Not the case with Commandos, but the longer you play them, the more you start seeing kind of like the Matrix code. You start to
Yeah.
decipher it, and you start to see all the little hidden complexities that this team has. That's why I say they're deceivingly straightforward because they seem like they're very simple, but there's a lot more meat to that as long as you dig in.
Really nice. Okay, I like that answer. So let me paint a picture for you. Let's shift to the topic. Let's say you're at a
Sure.
tournament and you're playing a
hmm
game, and I'm walking by and I stop at your table and I watch for about a minute, and it's your turn. What is the
hmm
coolest, flashiest, spiciest orc play that you can think of that would catch my attention?
Oh my goodness. It's a tie. Can I have a tie?
Sure.
Anything involving the commando grot
Okay.
always blows people away. And it doesn't matter what you're doing, just when you take this tiny little grot and all of a sudden he's on the other side of the board, I can't tell you how many times people watching games at tournaments or at my local shop just say, wait, what did he just do? And it's always just a fun thing. It's like, yeah, he's got a ninja rope. He's there, but now he's over there. I've used him as mobile cover. Like if I didn't see if I didn't see an angle that someone could get if they give themselves an extra inch of movement or something like that, and it's going to
Yeah.
put a key model of mine out of position where they're concealed but they won't have cover. I've I've flung the grot over there just to give him cover from another body. So I've
Yeah.
done silly stuff like that with him, and that always catches people off guard and is always very entertaining to see people get all hype over the ninja grot. But the flashiest is always it's got to be a Daka Daka round where you get to take a failed hit to a normal hit if you get a crit when you're throwing dynamite into a cluster.
Of
So
course.
against a horde team, if it doesn't matter who's throwing the dynamite, if it's a Daka Daka round and you're getting so many hits, just watching opponents pick up models one model after another with a 5/6 damage AP1 blast 2 weapon. Oh my god. It's there's a reason why it was taken off of the Daka Boy in the early designer commentary because
Yeah.
it's just such a great equipment piece and it's so much fun.
Okay. I'm gonna give you let's for the next question, instead of just asking it straight up, I'm gonna give you like a speed round, and
Okay.
I'm gonna name a faction, and all I want you
Okay.
to say is good matchup or bad matchup. Okay.
Okay,
All right. Now
let's do
we're
it.
gonna go through like a few. All right.
Okay.
Hunter Clade.
Oof. Piloted by who? Um,
Equal skill.
it's a
Equal skill.
equal skill. I would have to say fairly a little bit skewed towards a bad matchup,
Okay.
as they are with the extra model. If it was before the buff that they got, I would have said a good matchup,
Okay.
but
How about we
their
can
recent
say
buff had just
even?
sent them to them. Yeah, so more or less even.
Okay.
Reason being is that they have the tools to deal with 10 wound models as they're approaching, and they
Okay.
have good melee to kind of deal with that. But they do suffer under those activations, and those guns really hurt
Yeah.
orcs.
How about Corsairs?
Good matchup.
Okay.
Corsairs are fast, so are
Yep.
orcs. Orcs want you to be fast so they can get closer to you.
All right. Veteran Guard.
Um, I would say bad matchup.
All right.
Those extra activations do hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Spotter really turns off a lot of your abilities. So I would say that's closer to a bad matchup.
All right.
But I mean, when we say bad matchup,
Yeah.
it's a little bit splitting hairs though,
Yes.
because
Yeah.
when you were going to talk about matchups, I was ready to say it's like there's really no terrible matchup.
Yeah.
There's just less favorable matchups for
I
orcs,
see.
because you can't say that for all factions, because there are some factions that are just completely null and void if they go up against a certain team.
Yeah.
But because of the toolbox and because they're 10 models, orcs do really well into, I want to say, most teams, and even their bad matchups. It's not a done deal that you're going to lose in that bad matchup. It's just going to be a little bit more tactically stressful for you.
And that kind of ties back to what you're saying about that deep toolkit.
Hmm.
They have a lot that they can pull from to kind of make up for what are the quote unquote bad matchups for them, which is pretty
Correct. You got it.
interesting. So,
Hmm.
one thing that a lot of new players are really struggling with going into a team that I've noticed, especially this edition, is that turn one. What do I want to be doing on
Mm.
turn one? What's the right thing? What's the wrong thing? Let's say you're playing on open board because Into the Dark can be pretty samey.
Hmm.
What are you typically aiming to do on turn one? What are your goals there?
Hmm. Um, Ideally, I don't want to go first.
Okay.
Um, and I'm always making a decision as I see the map, as I see my opponent's map, like what faction I'm playing against. I'm always making a decision on if I want to forward deploy or not.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm also making a decision on if I'm going to need to use my strategic deploy, which lets a lot of guys dash forward. Essentially, everyone, if you set yourself up appropriately.
Yeah, on turn one. Yeah,
Uh,
for sure.
right at the drop in the strategy phase. So, um, I'm always doing that, and then I'm budgeting out my CP. So before I even deploy, I'm saying, okay, well, I'm going to need at least 3 just the scratches, maybe 4, but usually you're not using in the first turning point. So I need
Mm-hmm.
3 CP for that. And then how much CP am I willing to spend before the game even starts? So that's usually my first intro thought. The forward deploy is usually really good for a dynamite play if you're putting it on your knob, because the dynamite on a knob it takes care of itself. You don't need
Yeah.
to support him. But if I'm putting the dynamite on my breacher boy, I typically will not forward deploy the breacher boy. That's usually a turn 2 thing, unless it's a very close board and unless I see something open.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's a rule. More often than not, though, I'm looking for forward deploys for my sniper boy. So that's something that new players should definitely look at. What's a perch that if I was there right at the beginning of the game, it would change the entire tide of the battle? That's where I'm going to forward deploy, because you could shoot at conceal, and if he has both of his APL because he didn't have to move to that spot, he's shooting right from the beginning of the turning point.
Nice.
Um, so that's where I usually look for forward deploys. And for the shush tactic, most of the time it's either do I need to get to a point that I need that extra 3 inches for a lot of guys, or if I don't shimmy my guys by around 3 inches, am I going to get shot off the board by the other team turn one? So that's more of a defensive play than an offensive play for me. I'm usually tucking my guys into cover, into heavy terrain, that kind of stuff, to make sure I'm denying as much as I can in that first turning point while I get into more optimal positions for my DZ. And then the final thing I'm thinking of in turn one is who needs extra APL. You have 2 sources of APL, and this is part of their toolbox. The knob, I don't think of him as a 3 APL model, even though technically he can be for his activation. he's an APL battery, just like the comms boy, just a little worse at it.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm looking at, okay, who in Turning Point 1 is going to need that extra APL, and who in Turning Point 2 is going to need it, and making sure my deployment is done in a way that as I move out in Turning Point 1, those 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 plans can be executed. I'm not outside of the range that I would need to be in order to dish out that extra APL. And good models to think about are the Breacher Boy if he has dynamite, Rocket Boy so he can do a quasi Daka Boy thing,
Hmm.
and sometimes the Commando Grot. The Commando Grot can do a dash, and then he can do his Ninja Rope, and then maybe a mission objective that normally wouldn't be something he could do if he didn't have the 3 extra APL. Getting that extra dash to get a better line of sight out in the open kind of thing. So those are models to think about.
Nice.
And then sometimes a Sniper Boy, if you
Yeah.
want to be able to run and then still shoot out of conceal. He's also a good candidate for the extra APL.
All right.
Um, yeah.
So I guess usually when you play a team enough times, there's at least one thing that kind of unlocks after a certain amount of time where it's like, wow, this is such a revelation. I wish I thought about this earlier. What is like a level up tip, like a special secret
Mm,
saucy tip that you can give to a new player that will just speed up their development, kind of like as a Commandos player?
you're most effective late Turning Point 2, Turning Point 3. That's where Commandos really blow up in their effectiveness for not only points but also in eliminating enemy operatives.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but don't be too hasty to try and force their keywords to go off. Um, Boom Boy is great, but if you're going to leave yourself out as a sitting duck with a Rocket Boy and then lose that model when he could have just shot, if you were a little bit more conservative and moved so that way you wouldn't be shot back after you shot, you're
Mm-hmm.
effectively getting 2 times to roll the dice, even though you would have had rerolls if he survives, right?
Yeah.
And the same goes for the DACA boy. Like getting those rerolls is really nice to seal the deal um, on one operative, but if you throw him out to the pasture afterwards, he's out in the middle of nowhere just to make sure he was close enough to do that unload slugs ability, then you're not going to get another turn of shooting, which is effectively close to a reroll, right? You're rolling 5 dice again. So that's one thing. Don't be too eager too early on to get those keywords off because I mean rolling 5 dice is really great to begin with.
Yeah. Even
Um,
even hitting on fours, it's pretty good.
Correct, yeah. And then the other thing is capture hostage and infiltrate works with shooting.
Yeah.
I don't. It took me an embarrassing amount of games to actually get to the point where that clicked because it just seems like a melee thing, and I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, get it stuck in, lads. So I was going in and punching someone to death and then capturing them, right? But such a great thing to do with Daka Boy because he
Mm-hmm.
wants to be close, and with
Yep.
that Daka dash, he could get surprisingly close, and re-rolling and bolter damage, like you can eliminate a lot of stragglers or even full health, like 7, 8 wound models, and
Yeah.
then just absolutely disappear. At that point in Turning Point 3 or 4, if he's out in the middle of nowhere, he's probably just going to get shot and killed. So why not just get 2 VP for making that Hail Mary play, right?
Yeah. That's one of my favorite tac ops, period. Just in
Oh, I
general.
love
I
it.
love it.
Hmm.
All right. I've got one more question for you. This is a question I'm going to ask everybody on this.
Mm,
It's not one that I cued you in on. So you're going to
okay.
fire from the hip here. And it's possibly the most important question. Do you have a favorite Christmas song? And if so, what is it?
Oh, ah, I was singing it the other day. I was singing it to my little boy. Oh, it's Frosty the Snowman.
Oh,
There it
there you
is.
go. Frosty the
Yeah,
Snowman. All
nice
right.
little classic.
Very good. Very good. This is the one I'm most excited to hear from everybody. So, everybody, I hope everyone enjoyed this. Thank you, Emmanuel, for coming on and talking to me about orcs. It is always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I had a great time.
Absolutely. So, everybody, stay tuned for the next 11 days because there are far more days of Kill Team before Christmas. And there's 11 more factions you're going to get to hear about from the mouth of good players. So, As always, thank you to everybody for listening. If you've stumbled upon us and you're watching and listening and you're not subscribed, consider giving us a subscribe. We're getting close to 7,000. And as always, special shout out to everybody over at patreon.com/commandpoint and on our YouTube membership plan now. You guys are the best. And, I hope you had a good time listening to this. This is Shane and Emmanuel talking about Kommandos, signing out.